What happens when a beloved Hollywood legend walks into what he thinks will be a friendly interview, only to face the most hostile questioning of his entire career? In just 29 seconds, Jennifer Hudson would deliver a verbal attack so brutal and so unexpected that it would leave Samuel L. Jackson speechless for the first time in decades. This is the exclusive story of last night's shocking television moment that has everyone talking. The Jennifer Hudson Show was supposed to be different. When the Grammy winner turned talk show host first announced her daytime television venture, she promised viewers a warm, welcoming space where celebrities could share their stories without fear of ambush journalism. For months, Hudson had built her reputation on softball questions and genuine conversations that felt more like catching up with an old friend than a traditional interview. But something changed last night when Samuel L. Jackson walked onto that familiar set. The atmosphere felt different from the moment the legendary actor settled into the guest chair. Hudson's usual bright smile seemed forced, her energy oddly contained. The studio audience, packed with Jackson's devoted fans, sensed nothing amiss as they erupted in thunderous applause for the man who had given them iconic performances in over 150 films. Jackson, dressed in his signature casual elegance, waved to the crowd with that familiar, charismatic grin. At 75 years old, he remained one of Hollywood's most bankable stars, a living legend who had worked with every major director and appeared in some of cinema's most memorable moments. He had done thousands of interviews over his 5-decade career. This should have been routine. "Thank you so much for being here, Samuel," Hudson began, her voice carrying an edge that careful listeners might have detected. "I have to say, you look fantastic for someone your age." The comment hung in the air awkwardly. Jackson's smile flickered for just a moment, but he recovered quickly with his trademark laugh. "Well, Jennifer, 75 is the new 55, right?" The audience chuckled, but Hudson's expression remained neutral. She leaned forward in her chair, clasping her hands together in a gesture that seemed more confrontational than conversational. "Let's talk about your recent projects," she continued, her tone growing sharper. "You've been in the business for so long, Samuel. Some might say too long. Do you ever think about stepping aside for younger talent?" The question landed like a slap. Jackson's eyebrows raised in surprise, and a murmur rippled through the studio audience. This wasn't the Jennifer Hudson they knew. This wasn't the warm, supportive host who had built her show's reputation on kindness and respect. Jackson maintained his composure, but his voice carried a hint of confusion. "Well, Jennifer, I think there's room for everyone in this business. Experience has value, don't you think?" Hudson's laugh was cold, almost mocking. "Experience, yes, but relevance? That's another question entirely." The tension in the studio became palpable. Audience members began shifting uncomfortably in their seats. The camera operators, seasoned professionals who had seen countless interviews, exchanged glances of concern. This was unlike anything they had witnessed on Hudson's show. Jackson leaned back slightly, his famous composure beginning to crack. "I'm not sure I understand where this is coming from, Jennifer. Did I do something to offend you?" "Oh, Samuel," Hudson replied, her voice dripping with condescension. "Always playing the victim, aren't you? Just like in your movies, the same tired character over and over again." The insult was so unexpected, so unprovoked, that even the studio crew seemed frozen. Jackson had built his career on playing complex, often morally ambiguous characters. He was known for bringing depth and nuance to every role, from his breakthrough in Pulp Fiction to his recent work in major blockbusters. To reduce his extensive filmography to the same tired character was not just insulting, it was factually wrong. Jackson's voice remained steady, but his eyes flashed with hurt and confusion. "Jennifer, I came here expecting a friendly conversation. If you have issues with my work or my career, perhaps we should discuss this privately rather than ambushing me on television." Hudson's response was swift and brutal. "Ambushing you? Samuel, this is called journalism. Maybe you're just not used to being challenged because everyone's been kissing your feet for so long." The audience fell completely silent. The uncomfortable energy in the room was so thick, it could be cut with a knife. Jackson, a man who had faced down fictional villains and real-world challenges throughout his career, looked genuinely stunned by the unprovoked hostility he was receiving. "I've been in this business for 5 decades, Jackson said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of his experience. "I've worked with directors from Spike Lee to Quentin Tarantino. I've never encountered this level of disrespect in a professional setting." Hudson's eyes narrowed. "Disrespect? Is that what you call honest questions? Maybe that's the problem with your generation, Samuel. You can't handle the truth when it's presented to you." The verbal assault continued relentlessly. Hudson seemed determined to break down the man sitting across from her, attacking not just his career, but his character. She questioned his talent, his relevance, and even his right to continue working in an industry he had helped shape for generations. Jackson tried multiple times to steer the conversation toward more positive ground, sharing stories about his charitable work and his mentorship of young actors. But Hudson shut down every attempt at civil discourse, turning each response into another opportunity for attack. "You talk about mentoring young actors?" Hudson interrupted during one of Jackson's responses. "But isn't it true that you just take roles away from people who actually deserve them?" The accusation was so outrageous that Jackson actually laughed, though there was no humor in the sound. "Jennifer, I think you're confusing me with someone else. I've spent years helping young actors get their start in this business. Have you really? Or have you just been protecting your own interests while pretending to care about others?" The pattern became clear. No matter what Jackson said, no matter how graciously he tried to handle the situation, Hudson had an attack ready. She seemed determined to paint him as selfish, outdated, and irrelevant. The man who had brought joy to millions of moviegoers was being treated like a criminal on trial. As the interview progressed, Jackson's patience began wearing thin. His usual diplomatic responses started carrying an edge of frustration. The audience could see the exact moment when America's beloved actor realized that this wasn't a misunderstanding or a rough patch in the conversation. This was a deliberate, systematic attempt to humiliate him on national television. "Jennifer," Jackson said, his voice carrying a warning tone that fans of his movies would recognize, "I'm starting to think this interview was designed to make me look bad from the very beginning." Hudson's smile was cold and calculating. "Samuel, if you look bad, that's on you, not me. I'm just asking the questions that everyone else is thinking, but too afraid to ask." The statement was the final straw that would lead to the explosive confrontation that would define this interview and potentially end Jennifer Hudson's talk show career forever. Jackson's warning seemed to awaken something darker in Hudson. Her mask of professional composure slipped completely, revealing a level of animosity that shocked everyone in the studio. The woman who had built her career on powerhouse vocals and genuine warmth was transforming before their eyes into someone unrecognizable. "Questions everyone else is thinking?" Jackson repeated, his voice rising slightly. "Jennifer, I think you're projecting your own insecurities onto this situation. What is this really about?" The direct challenge seemed to unleash something in Hudson that had been building throughout the interview. Her eyes flashed with anger as she leaned forward in her chair, pointing an accusatory finger at her guest. "Insecurities? You want to talk about insecurities, Samuel? Let's talk about how you've been coasting on the same angry black man persona for 30 years. Let's talk about how you've never actually stretched as an actor." The accusation was not only cruel, but demonstrably false. Jackson had played everything from a Jedi Master in Star Wars to a philosophical hitman in Pulp Fiction, from a devoted father in various family films to complex villains in thrillers. His range as an actor was one of the things that had made him a Hollywood legend. The studio audience gasped audibly at Hudson's words. Several people in the front row looked visibly uncomfortable, and one woman could be seen shaking her head in disapproval. The camera crew continued filming, but their faces showed clear disgust at what they were witnessing. Jackson's response was measured but firm. "Jennifer, that statement shows either a complete ignorance of my body of work or a deliberate attempt to distort the truth. I played teachers, fathers, mentors, heroes, and yes, sometimes villains. To reduce that to a single stereotype is not just wrong, it's insulting to every director who has trusted me with their vision." Hudson's laugh was harsh and mocking. "Oh, please, Samuel. You show up, you yell a few lines, you collect your paycheck. That's not acting, that's just showing up." The insult hit like a physical blow. Jackson had dedicated his life to his craft, studying at Morehouse College, and later honing his skills in theater before transitioning to film. He was known in the industry for his meticulous preparation and his collaborative spirit on set. To suggest that he simply showed up was an attack on everything he had worked to build. "You know what, Jennifer?" Jackson said, his voice growing stronger. "I've been nothing but respectful to you since I walked onto this stage. I came here as a favor because my publicist said you were doing good work with your show. But this isn't an interview. This is a hit job." Hudson's response was swift and venomous. "A hit job? Samuel, this is accountability, something your generation has never had to face. You've been protected by the old boys network for so long that you can't handle one woman asking you real questions." The accusation was particularly galling because Jackson had actually been a vocal supporter of diversity in Hollywood long before it became fashionable. He had used his influence to help create opportunities for underrepresented actors and had spoken out against discrimination in the industry. To paint him as part of some exclusionary network was not just false, but deeply unfair. Jackson's patience finally snapped. Real questions? Jennifer, you haven't asked me one legitimate question this entire interview. You've made accusations, you've insulted my work, and you've shown complete disrespect for a guest who came here in good faith. Good faith? Hudson shot back. Is that what you call taking roles that should go to younger, more talented actors? Is that what you call staying in an industry that would be better off without you? The cruelty of the statement stunned everyone in the studio. To tell any performer that their industry would be better off without them was crossing a line that no professional interviewer should ever cross. It was personal, it was vicious, and it was completely unjustified. Jackson stood up from his chair, his tall frame commanding attention even in his obvious distress. That's enough, Jennifer. I don't know what your problem is with me, but I won't sit here and be disrespected like this. Hudson remained seated, looking up at him with a smug expression. Running away, Samuel? That's very typical of your generation. When things get tough, you just leave instead of facing the truth. The truth? Jackson's voice carried decades of experience dealing with real adversity, real challenges, real discrimination. The truth is that you've turned what should have been a professional interview into a personal attack. The truth is that you've embarrassed yourself, your show, and your network tonight. The audience began to murmur among themselves, clearly uncomfortable with what they were witnessing. Some people were shaking their heads in disapproval, while others looked like they wanted to leave but didn't want to cause a scene. The energy in the room had shifted completely from excitement to tension to outright disgust. Hudson's response showed no remorse whatsoever. Embarrassed myself? Samuel, I'm doing what real journalists do. I'm holding public figures accountable for their actions and their impact on the industry. Accountable for what? Jackson demanded, his voice rising. For having a successful career? For working consistently for 5 decades? For being professional and respectful to everyone I work with? What exactly am I being held accountable for, Jennifer? The question hung in the air because Hudson had no real answer. She had launched these attacks without any specific allegations, without any evidence of wrongdoing, without any legitimate journalistic purpose. Her assault on Jackson appeared to be motivated by nothing more than a desire to tear down a respected figure for her own entertainment. You're being held accountable for taking up space? Hudson finally said, her voice cold and calculated. For staying in a business that needs fresh blood instead of the same old faces doing the same old things. Jackson shook his head in disbelief. Jennifer, that's not how this industry works. There's room for everyone. From newcomers to veterans, experience doesn't become worthless just because someone reaches a certain age. Doesn't it, though? Hudson pressed. When was the last time you did anything truly memorable, Samuel? When was the last time you surprised anyone with your performance? The questions revealed Hudson's complete ignorance of Jackson's recent work. He had delivered critically acclaimed performances in several recent films, had been praised for his voice work in animated features, and continued to be one of the most sought-after actors in Hollywood. Her attacks weren't based on facts, but on a deliberate desire to cause harm. Jackson looked directly into the camera, addressing the audience at home rather than continuing to engage with his hostile host. Ladies and gentlemen, I've been in this business long enough to know when an interview has gone off the rails. What you're witnessing tonight isn't journalism, it's something else entirely. Hudson's reaction was immediate and explosive. Don't you dare try to turn this around on me, Samuel. Don't you dare try to make yourself the victim here when you're the one who can't handle a little criticism. The word little was perhaps the most insulting part of her statement. What Jackson had endured wasn't little criticism, but a sustained personal attack that had no basis in professional journalism. Hudson had crossed every line of basic decency and professional conduct. Jackson turned back to face her, his expression a mixture of disappointment and resolve. Jennifer, this isn't criticism. Criticism is constructive. Criticism is based on facts. What you've done tonight is character assassination, plain and simple. The confrontation was building to a crescendo that would forever change how people viewed Jennifer Hudson and her show. The beloved singer-turned-host had revealed a side of herself that shocked everyone who thought they knew her. Meanwhile, Samuel L. Jackson had shown remarkable restraint in the face of unprovoked hostility, demonstrating the professionalism and grace that had made him a respected figure throughout his career. But Hudson wasn't finished yet, and her final attack would push Jackson beyond his breaking point. Hudson's face twisted with something that looked almost like hatred as she prepared to deliver what she clearly intended to be her final, devastating blow. The studio had fallen into an eerie silence, with even the crew members stopping their usual behind-the-scenes movements to watch the train wreck unfolding before them. Character assassination? Hudson repeated mockingly. Samuel, let me tell you what real character assassination looks like. It's when someone like you stays in this business way past their expiration date, taking opportunities away from people who actually deserve them. It's when you coast on past success while contributing nothing new to the art form. Jackson's jaw tightened, but he maintained his composure. Jennifer, I've been nothing but respectful to younger actors throughout my career. I've mentored dozens of performers, recommended them for roles, and used my influence to open doors. Your accusations are completely baseless. Baseless? Hudson's voice rose to nearly a shout. Samuel, you're a relic, a fossil. You represent everything that's wrong with Hollywood today. The fact that you can't see that just proves how out of touch you really are. The attack was so vicious, so completely unprofessional, that several audience members actually stood up and began walking toward the exits. They had come to see their favorite actor in a friendly interview, not to witness him being verbally abused by someone who was supposed to be a professional broadcaster. Jackson looked around the studio, taking in the horrified faces of the crew, the uncomfortable squirming of the remaining audience members, and the smug satisfaction on Hudson's face. In that moment, something shifted in his expression. The diplomatic mask he had worn throughout his career fell away, revealing the steel underneath. You know what, Jennifer? Jackson said, his voice carrying a quiet intensity that was somehow more powerful than shouting. I've spent 50 years in this business. I've worked with legends and newcomers alike. I've been praised by critics and beloved by audiences. I've made mistakes, sure, but I've always tried to conduct myself with dignity and respect. Hudson opened her mouth to interrupt, but Jackson held up a hand, and something in his demeanor made her pause. But in all those 50 years, he continued, in all the interviews, all the press conferences, all the interactions with media professionals, I have never, and I mean never, encountered anyone as unprofessional, as disrespectful, and as downright cruel as you have been tonight. The words hung in the air like a judgment. Jackson's voice carried the weight of 5 decades of experience, and every person in that studio could feel the gravity of his statement. This wasn't just an actor responding to criticism. This was a respected professional calling out behavior that violated every standard of decency. Hudson's confidence flickered for the first time. Samuel, if you can't handle tough questions. Tough questions? Jackson's voice cut through her attempt at deflection like a knife. Jennifer, you haven't asked me a single question about my work, my process, my upcoming projects, or anything else that would interest your viewers. You've spent this entire interview launching personal attacks and making false accusations. That's not journalism, that's bullying. The word bullying seemed to hit Hudson like a physical blow. Her face flushed red, and for a moment, she looked genuinely rattled. Perhaps she was beginning to realize how her behavior would look to viewers at home, or maybe she was finally understanding the magnitude of what she had done. But instead of backing down or apologizing, Hudson doubled down on her cruelty. Bullying? Samuel, you're a grown man with a 50-year career and millions of dollars in the bank. You can handle a little pushback from someone who's willing to tell you the truth about yourself. Jackson shook his head slowly, and when he spoke again, his voice carried a sadness that was somehow more devastating than anger. The truth about myself? Jennifer, the truth is that I came here tonight excited to talk to a fellow performer, someone I thought would understand the challenges and joys of this business. The truth is that I've always supported other artists, regardless of their background or experience level. The truth is that I've tried to use whatever influence I have to make this industry better for everyone. He paused, looking directly at Hudson with an expression of profound disappointment. But the truth is also this. What you've done tonight says nothing about me and everything about you. You've shown everyone watching exactly who you really are underneath all the public relations and carefully crafted image. The observation was devastating in its accuracy. Hudson had indeed revealed something ugly about herself, something that completely contradicted the warm, supportive persona she had built her career on. The woman who sang about strength and resilience had used her platform to tear down someone who represented those very qualities. Hudson's response was swift and defensive. Who I really am? Samuel, I'm someone who isn't afraid to ask the hard questions. I'm someone who won't just fawn over celebrities because of their past achievements. No, Jackson replied firmly. You're someone who invited a guest onto your show and then ambushed them with personal attacks for no reason other than your own entertainment. You're someone who confused cruelty with courage and thought that tearing someone down would build you up. The accuracy of Jackson's assessment was evident in Hudson's reaction. She looked genuinely shaken for the first time since the interview began, as if she was finally seeing her behavior through the eyes of others and didn't like what she saw. Jackson began unbuttoning his jacket, a clear signal that he was preparing to leave. "Jennifer, I've been in situations where directors were having bad days, where co-stars were difficult, where technical problems made everyone frustrated. But I've never been in a situation where someone seemed to take genuine pleasure in trying to hurt another person for no reason." "You're being overly dramatic," Hudson said, but her voice lacked its earlier conviction. "This is just how real interviews work in today's media landscape." Jackson's laugh was bitter, but not cruel. "No, Jennifer, real interviews involve preparation, legitimate questions, and respect for your guests. What you've done tonight is closer to a public execution than journalism." The studio had become so quiet that every word carried with perfect clarity. The remaining audience members sat in stunned silence, watching a masterclass in how to maintain dignity under impossible circumstances. Jackson had not resorted to personal attacks, had not raised his voice beyond appropriate levels, and had not stooped to Hudson's level of cruelty. "I'm leaving now," Jackson announced, standing up fully and adjusting his jacket. "Not because I can't handle criticism, but because I have too much respect for myself and for this industry to participate in whatever this was supposed to be." Hudson made one final attempt to maintain control of the situation. "Samuel, if you walk out of this interview, it's just going to prove everything I said about your generation not being able to handle accountability." Jackson turned to face her one last time, and his response was delivered with the quiet power that had made him one of the most respected actors of his generation. "Jennifer, when people watch this interview, they're not going to remember what you accused me of. They're going to remember how you treated another human being. They're going to see the difference between someone who has earned their place in this industry through decades of hard work and someone who thinks that having a platform gives them the right to abuse their guests." With that, Samuel L. Jackson walked off the Jennifer Hudson Show set, leaving behind a stunned studio and a host who had just destroyed her own credibility on live television. The man who had faced down fictional villains and real-world challenges throughout his career had handled this unexpected assault with grace, dignity, and strength. Hudson sat alone in her chair, the studio lights suddenly seeming harsh and unforgiving. The audience began filing out quietly, many of them shaking their heads in disapproval. The crew members avoided making eye contact with their host, clearly uncomfortable with what they had just witnessed. In the space of one disastrous interview, Jennifer Hudson had transformed from a beloved entertainer into someone who had publicly bullied one of Hollywood's most respected figures. Samuel L. Jackson, meanwhile, had shown exactly why he had remained a treasured presence in the entertainment industry for 5 decades. His response to unprovoked hostility had been a masterpiece of professionalism and human dignity. The interview that was supposed to showcase Hudson's journalistic skills had instead revealed the true character of both participants. One had shown grace under pressure, while the other had shown something far less admirable. The consequences of this 29-second explosion would reverberate far beyond the studio walls, but the man who walked away with his dignity intact was undoubtedly Samuel L. Jackson.